Hi, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of How We Get There, Stories of Transformation and Redemption in Tech. In our previous episodes, we've focused on the transformation of individuals through their career in tech. But today, we're taking it from a different angle, assistive technology. While, like me, you might think of this as a relatively new phenomenon, you'd be dead wrong. Assistive tech has been on the scene since prehistory, and examples such as walking sticks or crutches, 11th century corrective lenses, or the invention of Braille in 1824. But for our purposes, we're talking about more recent tech, particularly in academic and career settings. Since the invention of text-to-speech in 1961, the landscape of assistive tech in education and the workplace has blown up, making it possible for people with learning exceptionalities to engage with materials on a more even playing field. On this topic, and to share his personal experiences with assistive tech and his very interesting life story, I'm happy to introduce Mopa Dean. Welcome, Mopa.
Thank you for having me.
Now, maybe you could set the stage for us a little bit and give us a sense of what learning and life for you in general was like before you were introduced to any assistive technology.
Well, very young. I guess it was about grade 2. I was first diagnosed with a learning disability as being dyslexic, and that followed me all through school and academia and even up till my present life. And um, public school, I guess what grade 8, grade 1 to 6 sort of thing was quite struggle for me. I'd make my B's and D's backwards, and I would sort of skip reading specific words when I'd be reading a book. I'd even have some trouble with some numbers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And because of all those things, and also because of spending a lot of time in the hospital as a kid, I was asthmatic, and I was constantly in and out of the hospital with some form of pneumonia or collapsed lungs and stuff like that. Not only did I have the learning disability, but I got behind in school a lot too. So the two of them was somewhat as a disaster. So I hated school. I always hated public school. I hated, I guess junior school. I hated middle school. I hated high school. I couldn't wait to leave. I did have some really good teachers who would help me and come up with solutions. So because I had trouble reading, I had a teacher that whenever I had a book, she would talk to my special education teacher, and the special education teacher would go out of her way to get me the movie on a VCR so I could watch the movie, then go back and read the book. And things like that would make a really big difference. And as I got older and they were sort of figuring out some of my learning issues, there was an awful lot of testing. There was IQ tests. There was tests putting things together. There was physical tests. There's special education classes and stuff like that. They would make exceptions and try to help me, but that also came at a cost at a class as well. So I'd always be behind the class catching up in high school. And they would do things like, for example, if I had to write an essay, they would allow me to dictate to someone.
Right.
Later years, they would allow me to use a computer and stuff like that. And not all teachers like that. There was one teacher I would make my my essay on tape, and I gave it to him, and he just looked at me and said, "How am I supposed to mark this?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, talking back with my teacher, she just told him, "Goes, well, just you mark it for the content." Realizing that you have a learning disability, so he gave me a D. Right?
Right.
I had another teacher. He was my grade 4 teacher too.
Mm-hmm.
This teacher told my mom that I'd be in prison by the time I was 19 because kids with learning disabilities and other issues related like that don't make it in life. He literally told her that.
Wow. Yeah. So like a lot of prejudice. And even though you were kind of working, almost creating your own assistive tech, right? Like you're doing recordings, you're watching VHS tape versions of the books and trying with what you had, you're still encountering that wall of preconceptions.
Very much. I mean, just, some of this, and I guess I'm showing my age here, was before personal computers were in everybody's homes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They used to talk about word processes. I think there was one called Circle and one called Lisa. And I guess this was the time of like the Commodore 64 and the TRS 80 or the Trash 80 computers and stuff like that, right? So as the years gone on, a lot of the teachers tried to get me more involved in computers because I think they just saw that that would be the future in terms of helping me achieve my academic goals. By that time, though, my academic goals was to get out of academia. So by the time I was my mid to late teens, I was also considered a behavioral student. So I was kicked out of most of my classes. I got kicked out of school. My mom had to fight for me to get into one school, and you know, they would take me out of different classes there too. And I was hanging out with all the bad kids apparently in the smoking area, even though I still talk to most of them today. You know, some of them are in bands that I've been in or still are. Yeah. So, I guess the whole experience of school and how it impacted on me, and I guess just sort of how I um, worked within my environment, which at the time for kids with learning disabilities and stuff like that, even getting into my high schools, I mean, there wasn't much they could do or offer you, right?
Hmm.
They could give you extra classes and you could spend extra time in class, which was something I didn't want to do, and of
Yeah.
course, special ed teachers were always bargaining with me to get me to redo work done. And I just get to the point where if I didn't like the work, I just wouldn't do it. If I didn't like the class, I'd just get up and leave. If I liked something, apparently I excelled on it. And they couldn't understand why my assignments were either half done or never handed in. But then I would ace the tests. They could
Yeah.
never figure that out. So, in the later years, they were like, oh, he's a gifted school kid. He's really intelligent. But the work didn't show it. So they always never knew what to do with it. Right.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my experience with the beginnings of adaptive technology uh, as a teenager and sort of as a disenfranchised kind of fringe society type person,
Hmm.
interested in listening to music and drinking and going to punk rock shows and, listening to weird radio stations than I was about anything much else.
Well, and that sounds like a lot more stimulating, right? When it's coming in a format that is more suited to the way you engage with things. If it's
Oh,
auditory, it's
absolutely.
written word, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The
I
music
mean,
would have appeal.
they always found that I excelled at things that I liked.
Hmm. Yeah, which is the mark of like intelligence, right? Is being captivated by those things that cause curiosity. So I'm wondering then, what was your first kind of introduction to people being interested in helping, I guess, and providing these new options?
I think and the first real people to sort of kind of work with me on that was when I was working at the community radio station U of TCIUT. The station managers that I worked with, and some of the other people, I mean, first of all, in an environment like that, they were very aware of people's issues around disabilities and stuff. We
Mhm.
had a woman who used to read the news who was blind, and she'd come in and do all her stories in Braille before she'd go up and do them, right? Jeff Healy, I don't know if you remember or know who
Mhm.
Jeff Healy is. He
Yeah.
used to do a show there. And basically, he would come up to the studio and we'd sit him down in front of the board and say, okay, here's your board. And after a while, he just remembered it, right? So, and there was other people who had other ability issues as well. So between people actually being involved in the station and people who were sort of trying to work within those communities and do a radio show, and just people sort of being a little bit more aware of things, I'd find that some of the staff would work with me by, correcting my work for me, helping me out that way. So
Mhm.
here's the letter, it's got to go to the CRTC. Can you look at it for me, sort of thing? And then we started playing with the ideas of using text to speech. So IBM had a program back then. I can't remember what it was. It was a very basic text to speech program, but they helped me out with that. I think there was the one called Dragon, but I can't quite remember the name of it. Uh, and I think that was the first place that I really sort of kind of encountered people sort of kind of being, it was okay,
Mhm.
sort of learn in a different way or be a different type of person or sort of thing, which is actually why I got into sort of the whole punk rock scene because it was the only people that would have me, right? They didn't care. I mean, it'd be funny that, yeah, Mopa can't read right or the letters fall off the page. But other than that, we'd laugh about it. No one would give a shit. I wasn't ostracized as I was in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, a community of misfits.
very much,
Yeah.
very, very, very much, right? I mean, you're talking blind drummers and bands and people playing bass with fingers, and so it's always been quite the collective of misfits, I guess, for lack of better, the prime world, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so a community radio station where they had a big community of people involved with how people with disabilities go about their world and doing things. So it was definitely a good environment for that. And that really sort of kind of started to open up things,
Right. So
Yeah.
the
I mean,
community.
there was one program we found for free, which I used to use, was it would allow me to it would read back to me what I wrote,
Mhm.
and I could actually hear what I was writing. So I could hear where there was pauses and run-on sentences and stuff like that. So it would allow me the opportunity to sort of hear what I wrote. If words were spelled wrong, it would say them wrong. So I could catch it that way. And then I could go into the program itself. And then after it's read it back to me, I can, okay, yeah, I don't want a comma there, or I don't want a semicolon there. I mean, still to this day, things like punctuation elude me, right?
Mm.
I've never really learned properly how to do proper, I guess, punctuation and even grammar to that degree. I mean, I know the odd thing like an Oxford comma and stuff like that, but
Just people argue about it so often, I'm sure.
yeah,
Very
you know,
contentious, the Oxford comma.
but yeah, I've always had trouble still to this day with things like that.
Mhm. So I'm wondering now kind of maybe you could tell us a little bit about your current career and if you're using any assistive tech in that position.
Well, so my current career, um, I work as a security analyst for the government,
Mhm.
and it's not as exciting as it may sound. What led me to that was I got to a point, and I've worked for the government for a long time, so I was doing other things before as a security analyst. And I got to the point prior to that there was a lot of good experience I got from community radio. There's a lot of things that I learned in terms of how to organize myself to help me do things. So, I started doing things like living out of Outlook, right? Trying
Mhm.
to plan things ahead, making sure that I'd make enough time to allow myself the extra time I needed to look over documents and track them and stuff like that. They didn't they weren't offering me a lot of uh, adaptive technology then, but when I got sick of it all at one point, and I was like a zapper at radio, I started kind of figured out the only person that was going to make any breaks for me was me. Right? I got promised a lot of things and it never happened. And I got told, if you do this, we'll pay for it. If you do that, we won't. But,
Mhm.
but so they promise you the moon and the stars to give you a pebble, sort of thing, right? So I just said, screw this. I'm going to go back to school and start learning some stuff. That's where I really started coming across adaptive technology, because after I started doing some college courses, I realized I still had a few brain cells left, right? And then when I got into university, because I actually started to really like learning again at the college level and the university level, there was a lot more on. So, for example, I had to do a lot of reading even when
Yeah.
I went I did a master's, which was constant reading. But one of the tricks I learned was get an iPad and download all your books. And when I got too tired or too fatigued, I'd just turn on to read text, and I'd be able to absorb a good chunk of what I was reading as it was being talked to me or read to me.
Mhm.
That would help. I'd also find sometimes too that when I was having trouble understanding what I was reading and trying to put it in trying to contextualize it, make sense, that the reading function would help. So that was a big help. The other thing too is doing research and trying to sort of cite things in terms of the papers I was writing, and
Mhm.
even just the ability to, at this point, I mean, it's sort of kind of the computer environment that we're used to. Computers really was the big help. I don't think I would have been able to do university at any level if I didn't have access to computers and adaptive technology and be able to listen to stuff and be able to read stuff. At the university level, they still couldn't do a lot for me other than give me extra time and suggest maybe certain types of software like Grammarly or stuff like that, which
Mhm.
they're okay, right? They're not perfect.
Yeah.
Uh, so the advent in the last, say, 20 years, and a lot has happened with computers and generations of computers and software and development of software, and even in the way it's going from out there, right? We
Hmm.
talked about how people can have, missing limbs, get an artificial limb, and they can connect that to their synapses and stuff like that. And all they have to
Yeah.
do is think about opening their hand, they can open their hand, right? It's come a long, long way. And I think I was in that right place at the right time to watch it. I was a little early to completely take advantage of it, but when I decided to go back to school about 20, let's see, 24, but 24, 25 years after I completely left the education system, there was enough out there to really, really make a difference.
Yeah.
Uh,
It
and
sounds like you had very like diverse experiences too, like the early days when there was almost nothing and you were creating something out of nothing and doing your best and kind of being turned off of education and this weird social construct that is education, especially back then, was very, very
well,
structured and
one of the funny things about it all was I also had a horrible handwriting, which I still do. So,
mm,
having like a word processor or a computer, that makes a really, really big difference.
oh,
Right.
absolutely.
And, from working with computers and stuff like that, I became an okay typer. And from the amount of reading and writing and essays and research and writing my thesis and stuff, a lot of that, I wouldn't call myself a great academic writer at this point, but the intervention of technology and computers and how that worked with me and how that was able to work with my brain and how I was able to sort of, almost climb inside the computer and use it to my advantage for the thing that I wanted to do and make it, it made a big difference. And I think it has helped me become a better writer and a better communicator.
Mm.
And I still use a lot of those tools today in my work. Sometimes some of the stuff I'm writing about is a little bit sensitive at the government level. So I still give my stuff to my peers to read. And in my department, we do that anyways. So it's not a big deal. We
Mm.
look at each other's works because things like minutia when you're dealing with security are important, right?
Mhm.
And safety and protecting things is a pretty important thing. So you always want a second eye to look at it. So there's a culture of that. So walking in there and saying, "Hey, man, I'm dyslexic. Can you look at my work?" Uh, There's no big deal because that's what we do in the unit I am
Yeah. Yeah, that
doing.
makes sense.
So I, you know, I still rely on a lot of this stuff very much. I don't
Mhm.
do, funny enough, I don't do a lot of text to speech writing, which astounds me sometimes because, I may be walking down the street and I'm thinking, oh, what a great lyric. I should put that into a song. And I don't write it down. And I'm like, I'll remember it by the time I get home, which I don't have a good memory anymore. So there's those times where something really comes up for me that's really good. And I don't bother to throw on the headphones and do a text I don't know why. Right. It would be really good. Even in terms of like when I'm writing stuff still to this day. If I'm writing a big document, I don't do a lot of text to speech stuff. I gotta physically type it out.
Mhm.
Like I gotta puke it out and look at it. Then I adjust it, right?
Yeah.
I would
It's
still
interesting.
say the combination of, you know, my learning disabilities, which really it just how would they put it? They used to put it that I'm more of a hands-on learner than I
Mhm.
am as someone who reads something and takes in the information. I don't think I was dumb, and I don't think people who have those issues are dumb or stupid or anything. People learn in a lot of different ways. They
Mhm.
take information in a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, people really still have to advocate for themselves when they're talking about issues around disability. But it is getting better. And if you can get into the system somehow, there are some resources to help out. But a lot of it's, I really think now is going to still depend on the individual, their relationship with mass media and things like YouTube and what's out there. There's a lot of information there that if people take the time, they can help themselves out. So, my word would be to anyone who's struggling, get on the computer and find out, see what's out
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I could do a whole separate podcast on my experiences of advocating for my son in the public education system with the learning
Yeah,
exceptionality
yeah.
and some of the things that I was told, oh my goodness, I dare not repeat them because they were so ridiculous. But, once you kind of have a handle on what's going on and know what's out there, the world is a lot more friendly, I think, once you know what you're advocating for. So,
Well, I think if you can create your environment and bring
mhm.
the things in there to help you shine as an individual,
Yeah.
then, a lot of times really what people consider our disabilities uh, are really just sort of how people work outside the structures of the system, right?
Mhm.
The learning systems when I was growing up were very rigid. It didn't have a lot of sort of outside of the box thinking. People that were getting into that stuff were just getting out of school. The psychologists and the special education teachers and stuff like that, right? They were just getting out of university and getting into the world. And even like, when I was in school, we were doing punch card computers and stuff like that, right? So
Mhm.
things were happening and technology was catching up. And now it's gone past us, which is great. I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But I got to watch it all. Unfortunately, though, I had to be at the mercy of sort of trying to immerse myself, right? I came from a working class family, so we didn't have money for computers.
Mm.
Had a lot of computers at school. So until I was able to sort of create those resources or get access to them, which is sometimes a big issue for people dealing with disabilities, it was tough.
Absolutely. Yeah. The issues of access and acceptance as well. Like I think you talked about it a little bit, but like the value of work that is created through these forms of technology, I think is still there. Where if anything, breaking down a barrier that exists to allow people to show what they know and show their amazing abilities. So I think we have work to do maybe in that regard
Oh,
as well.
well, people with disabilities, and I'm not really an expert. I can only talk from my personal experience in terms of what I've seen, what I've experienced. I had. I mean, there's still very much a marginalized community,
Mhm.
right? And I think with a lot of different marginalized communities, we're getting better. Some we're getting better with others. Some are getting more acceptance with others, but I think there's still a long way to go before we sort of not make society equal, but equitable.
Yes.
People get the things that they need.
Hmm.
People get the things that, put them on the same playing fields to make things sort of, even, right?
Yeah.
Without the goalposts moving around.
Yeah. And allow everybody to have a voice, a seat at the
Yeah.
table, as I call it.
Yeah. Very much. Very much.
Well, Mopa, I usually ask a question that makes more sense for the other kinds of podcasts I've done, which is, if it weren't for tech, what would you be doing now? But instead, I want to ask you a completely different question, which is if you were to kind of gaze into a crystal ball and see what's going to happen next in this kind of technology that assists
Yeah.
people such as yourself, what do you think it's going to be?
I don't think we have to gaze into a crystal ball. I mean, we're watching it happen in real time, right? I can't
Mhm.
remember what the exact time frame versus technology is this moment. I know when I was writing my thesis, because a lot of it had to do with AI and
Mhm.
people using computers and cyberspace as a asymmetrical form of warfare and stuff like that. We'll don't need to get into that, but I think AI is sort of kind of going to be replacing a lot of things. I think as we watch the technology that it sort of kind of develops itself, and as we use technology and dual usage or other forms of usages,
Mhm.
I don't want to say we're going to become cyber people, but I think it all depends on sort of what the individual requires to sort of be that equal person in society. So we're already hooking things up to our brains. I mean, if you look here, right? That's sensor I have for my diabetes, where I just put
Hmm.
my phone up to it and tell me what blood sugar's at, right?
Yeah.
So we're already interacting in that way. And I think in some respects we've been doing it for a while. And I think it's just gonna become more and more and more, right?
Yeah.
And I think the cleave between research and technology is getting closer and closer and closer, right? And I think there's going to be more of a connectivity and interaction between the individual and the technology. And because of the way that technology works, person to person. So I may be, lying with my cat somewhere, and instead of actually texting you, I would just think about you and send you
Hmm.
my message, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So
And I
less of
think,
the division between the individual and the technology, and kind of a
right, and I don't know if things like that are good or bad. I know we're seeing how that there are a lot of issues coming up with how people are connected to their phones,
hmm.
connected to the internet, how that impacts on people in society and how it changes the way that we interact with society and each other. Um, so yeah, I'm not too sure how I feel about that, but I think we're just going to get more and more enveloped with the
Hmm.
technology as extensions of ourselves, right?
Hmm.
So, I think we're going to get to the point where if someone has a learning disability, if someone has a mobility issue or a sight issue or a trauma issue or something to that effect, I think it's going to get to the point where they will be able to interact with their technology in a even playing field and be able to shine just as brightly as the completely able-bodied individual.
Hmm.
And I like to think that as we go more and more down that road, um, things like disabilities aren't going to really matter that much,
Yeah.
because we will have been able, through technology and research and development, be able to create an even playing field where people can have a voice, people can contribute, people can help develop research work any way and anywhere they want to.
Yeah. Potential golden age, really, like of
But here's here's
everybody
here
being able to speak. Yeah.
here's the catch, and this goes back to what I was saying as a kid growing up in a sort of working class family. People have to have access to it,
Yes.
right?
And we
And
still have serious issues with that globally. Yeah.
so if
There's
people can't
not
get
equal
access to
access.
this sort of technology, then they can't participate. And I think
Hmm.
that's going to maybe even exclude people even more than they are already. So, as usual, technology and people, double-edged sword.
Hmm. Yeah. And progress generally is benefiting the privileged as usual. But
Does that
yeah,
answer your question?
it does.
Yeah.
It does. Yes. I think that's a like it's not a Pollyanna view of it, definitely, where you could have just said, yes, it's going to get better for everybody. And this is what I see. And I agree with you that we're going to move forward and it's going to make it possible for people to engage more fully in ways that they couldn't before. But it is also maybe at the price of other things and also won't
Mhm.
fulfill everyone. But thank you so much for your time, Mopa. And I think that our listeners really appreciated your insights on this topic.
Interesting podcast that you've put together. I think it's a
Thank
really
you.
interesting concept. I'd like to ask you,
Mhm.
how did you come up with this idea for this podcast and to sort of develop it? Because I think it's a really original and unique idea.
Well, it actually came out of a conversation about lifelong learning that I was having in a kind of presentation inside the company that I work for. And our COO was talking about his own personal journey in tech and how he was actually my previous guest and he did his first piece of programming at 11 years old and started to sell it. And then I thought about my own story as kind of a working artist and single parent, but just kind of always on the margins of society in so many ways and having a really
Uh,
hard time engaging and finding I always had community, but not work community.
right.
And I just found there was a strange intersection in those two stories, even though they were incredibly different, me so late in life, him so early on in life, but that we both came to this place in the world of tech and found a community and found this almost bizarre world where you can be as weird as you want to be. If you're good at what you do, then it doesn't matter.
Yep.
And so I wanted to explore that topic more. And it wasn't until I was talking with you, actually, and we were talking on Facebook, where it kind of made me realize that this story of transformation through tech doesn't just apply to careers in the tech industry, but also to people who have engaged with the tech that's being produced and how that transforms their lives. So
Very much.
you inspired this topic of our conversation today.
Oh, that's very cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I have a funny feeling that your podcast, based on what I've listened to, is going to inspire a lot of people, a lot of other people, and hopefully those people will engage with you too, because each story like this is very unique.
Mm-hmm.
I see mine as very suburban and very sort of kind of, you know, above ground, for lack of better things. I think there's probably some really, 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 really interesting stories and journeys people have out there, and I hope you discover them all.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Mopa. I hope so as well. And I hope it encourages people to get involved in tech and excited about it, and people that maybe thought this wasn't a career for them because they picture it being just for some people and not for them, that they have a place that they can find success.
Yep, agreed, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please listen to the others that are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks.